Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Today, we're going to discover an emotional story about a woman who suddenly returns after 20 years of disappearance. But everything changes when she finally confesses that she is Diep's real mother. Why did she abandon her daughter for so long? And what terrifying secret has Mr. Huan been hiding all these years? If you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with mystery, heartbreak, and shocking twists, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos. The photograph trembled slightly in Diep's hands as she stared at it beneath the dim yellow light hanging from the ceiling. The old paper had already faded with time, its edges bent and worn from years of being hidden away, but the faces inside it remained painfully clear. A younger version of Lan stood beside a little girl, no older than 4 or 5. The child looked exactly like Diep, the same eyes, the same small face. Even the tiny birthmark near the chin matched perfectly. For several seconds, Diep could not breathe properly. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly inside her chest that the entire room seemed to disappear around her. Behind her, the sound of soft footsteps broke the silence. Lan stood near the doorway, staring at the photograph with pale, trembling eyes. Neither woman moved. Outside the small wooden house, wind pushed harder against the bamboo fence, while distant thunder rolled slowly across the mountains. The weather felt strange tonight, heavy and suffocating, as though the entire village somehow sensed the truth, trying to rise into the open. Finally, Diep lifted her eyes toward Lan. "Who is this child?" she asked quietly. Her voice barely sounded like her own. Lan opened her mouth slightly, but no words came out at first. Tears immediately gathered in her eyes, making Diep's confusion grow even stronger. "Answer me," Diep whispered. Lan lowered her head. "I'm sorry." The apology hit harder than any explanation could have. Diep stared at her in disbelief. "Sorry for what?" Still, Lan couldn't answer directly. The older woman looked completely shattered now, as if the photograph falling onto the floor had destroyed the last wall protecting her emotions. Her hands shook faintly at her sides, while years of guilt slowly surfaced across her face. Before either of them could continue, a sleepy voice interrupted the silence. "Mom." Nee had woken up. The little girl rubbed her eyes and looked around the room in confusion. When she noticed Lan crying, she immediately climbed down from the blankets and walked toward her. "Why are you sad?" she asked innocently. Lan quickly wiped her face and forced herself to smile. "I'm not sad." But even Nee seemed unconvinced. The child gently touched Lan's arm before looking back at Diep. "Did Grandma do something wrong?" That single word made the atmosphere inside the house tighten painfully again. "Grandma." Diep slowly looked down at the photograph still clutched in her hands, then back at Lan. Questions began crashing into her mind all at once. Why did Lan know so much about her? Why did she look at her with so much pain? Why did her presence feel strangely familiar? And why did seeing her cry make Diep's chest hurt in a way she couldn't explain? The rest of the night passed in complete emotional tension. Eventually, Diep carried Nee back to the blankets and waited until the child fell asleep again. But even after the house became quiet, neither woman could rest. Lan remained sitting near the wooden wall, with her eyes lowered, while Diep stood near the small table, holding the photograph tightly against her chest. The silence between them no longer felt ordinary. It felt dangerous. Finally, Diep spoke again. "You knew my mother, didn't you?" Lan closed her eyes slowly. "Yes." The answer came almost like a whisper. Diep immediately stepped closer. "Then tell me where she is." Lan's breathing became uneven. For years, she imagined this moment, countless times. She imagined what she would say if she ever stood in front of her daughter again. She imagined explanations, apologies, tears, forgiveness. But now that the moment had finally arrived, every prepared word disappeared completely. Lan began softly, before stopping herself. Diep's frustration slowly grew stronger. "What happened to her?" she asked. "Why did she leave me?" Lan looked down at her trembling hands. She didn't want to leave. That answer confused Diep even more. She left anyway. The pain inside her voice became impossible to hide now. For years, Diep survived without asking questions, because she believed answers would never come. She buried the loneliness deep inside herself and forced her life to move forward. But tonight, suddenly standing in front of someone connected to her past, all the emotions she spent years suppressing slowly began rising again. "She abandoned me," Diep whispered. Lan immediately shook her head. "No." "Then where was she?" Diep asked sharply. "Why didn't she come back?" Lan's eyes filled with tears again. "She thought staying away would protect you." Diep let out a bitter laugh under her breath. "Protect me?" she repeated quietly. "Do you know what it feels like growing up without a mother?" Lan looked completely broken after hearing that question. The room fell silent again, except for the sound of rain finally beginning outside. Small drops tapped softly against the roof, at first before growing heavier with every passing minute. Lan stared at Diep through tears. Every painful sentence her daughter spoke felt deserved, because none of it was a lie. While the storm deepened outside, another storm slowly began forming elsewhere. In the city, Mr. Huan sat alone inside his office long after midnight. Papers remained scattered across the desk in front of him, untouched for hours. The only light inside the room came from a small lamp near his chair, casting heavy shadows across his tired face. Then, his phone rang. The investigator, Mr. Huan, answered immediately. "Well?" he asked. The voice on the other side hesitated briefly before speaking. "The woman using the name Lan. She's actually Dieu." The moment those words entered the room, Mr. Huan froze completely. His grip tightened around the phone. "You're sure?" "Yes." A long silence followed. For years, Mr. Huan convinced himself the past was buried permanently. He believed Dieu would never return. He believed the secrets surrounding Diep would remain hidden forever. But now, everything was collapsing. Slowly, uncontrollably. "Where is she now?" he asked quietly. "She's staying with Diep." Mr. Huan immediately stood up from his chair. Panic finally reached his face completely, because he understood something terrifying. If Dieu revealed the truth to Diep, then the past he spent 20 years hiding would finally destroy everyone connected to it, including his own son. Meanwhile, back in the countryside, The emotional distance between Diep and Lan continued growing more painful. The rain outside became heavier now, filling the silence between them with endless noise. Lan slowly looked around the small house, while tears continued gathering in her eyes. Every corner carried memories she could barely survive looking at again. The old wooden table, the blankets near the wall, the kitchen where Diep cooked for Nai, the tiny family moments she secretly watched all evening. This should have been her life. That realization crushed her completely. I watched you for a long time before coming here, Lan admitted softly. Diep frowned slightly. What? Lan wiped her tears slowly. I wanted to know if you were happy. The confession unsettled Diep immediately. How do you know so much about me? Lan lowered her eyes again. Because, she whispered, you're the most important person in my life. Diep stared at her in silence. The words felt too emotional, too personal, too painful. And deep inside, something terrifying slowly began forming in her mind. But she still couldn't force herself to say it aloud. Not yet. Outside, thunder cracked loudly across the dark mountains, while rain continued pouring over the small countryside house, where two women sat, trapped between the past and a truth neither of them could escape anymore. Inside the small wooden house, the emotional tension had become almost unbearable. Diep stood frozen near the table, while rain crashed heavily against the roof above them. Across the room, Lan could barely remain standing after finally confessing the truth she had hidden for 20 years. Neither woman looked the same anymore. The distance between them had changed completely in only a few seconds. Not strangers, not guests, mother and daughter. But instead of bringing comfort, the truth only deepened the pain already filling the room. You don't get to do this, Diep whispered through trembling breaths. Lan immediately shook her head, while tears continued running down her face. I know. No, you don't know anything. The sadness inside Diep's voice slowly turned into anger again. Years of loneliness were finally rising to the surface all at once, too heavy to control anymore. You disappeared, she said. You left me alone my entire life. Lan lowered her eyes in shame. There wasn't a single birthday where you came back, not once. Every word struck harder than the last. Outside, thunder shook the mountains again, while rainwater streamed endlessly from the edge of the roof. I thought maybe my mother was dead, Diep continued softly, because believing that hurt less than believing she abandoned me. Lan covered her mouth as a broken sob escaped her chest, because she understood exactly why her daughter felt that way, and because deep inside, she had spent 20 years punishing herself with the same thought every single day. I wanted to come back, Lan whispered desperately. There were so many times I almost did. Then why didn't you? Lan closed her eyes tightly. Because of fear. Because of shame. Because every mistake from the past kept destroying her courage before she could reach her daughter again. But none of those reasons sounded strong enough anymore. Not after 20 years. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the house. Both women immediately looked toward the door. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then another knock came, harder this time. Lan's expression instantly changed. Fear. Deep, familiar fear. Outside, headlights shined faintly through the heavy rain falling across the yard. Mr. Huan had arrived. Diep slowly walked toward the door, while Lan remained frozen behind her. The moment the door opened, cold wind and rain swept violently into the house. Mr. Huan stood outside completely drenched, his breathing uneven after driving through the storm. His eyes immediately searched the room and stopped on Lan. The silence between them felt terrifying. Years disappeared instantly the moment they looked at each other again. "You shouldn't have come here," Lan said quietly. Mr. Huan stepped inside slowly, while rainwater dripped from his jacket onto the wooden floor. "I came before things got worse." Diep looked back and forth between both of them in confusion and anger. "You knew," she whispered toward Mr. Huan. He couldn't answer immediately. That hesitation told her everything. A bitter laugh escaped Diep's lips. "All of you knew the truth except me." Mr. Huan rubbed his forehead tiredly before finally speaking. "Diep, things were complicated back then." "No," she snapped. "Stop saying that." Her voice rose sharply enough to wake Ni again. The little girl slowly sat up from the blankets and stared around the room nervously after seeing everyone crying. "Mom?" she whispered softly. Diep immediately turned away, trying to hide her tears. But it was too late. Ni had already sensed something terrible was happening. Meanwhile, the atmosphere between Lan and Mr. Huan grew colder by the second. Lan stared directly at him, with years of pain behind her eyes. "You still haven't changed," she said quietly. "You still think you can control everything." Mr. Huan looked exhausted now, older than he had earlier that day. "I was trying to protect everyone." Lan suddenly laughed bitterly. "Protect?" she repeated. "Look around you." Her voice trembled harder with every word. "Our daughter grew up without a mother." The sentence hit the room like lightning. Even after hearing the truth already, Diep still froze emotionally after hearing Lan call her "our daughter" in front of Mr. Huan. Mr. Huan lowered his eyes, because he knew she was right. 20 years earlier, fear and pride had destroyed everything between them. Decisions made during anger had separated a mother from her child forever, and now the consequences stood directly in front of him. "I never wanted things to end this way," he whispered. "But they did," Lan answered. Silence followed again, heavy, painful, exhausting. Then Diep finally spoke. "What really happened 20 years ago?" Neither adult answered immediately. The rain outside softened slightly now, but the tension inside the house only grew stronger. Diep stepped closer. "I deserve to know." Mr. Huan slowly sat down near the table, as though the weight of the past had finally become too heavy to carry, standing up. Lan remained near the doorway, with tears still covering her face. Finally, Mr. Huan spoke, quietly. "Back then, your mother and I loved each other." Diep's breathing immediately became uneven again. "But our families never accepted the relationship," he continued. "There was pressure, conflict, and mistakes we both made." Lan looked away painfully. Mr. Huan closed his eyes briefly before continuing. "When you were born, everything became worse. The room fell completely silent. "We were young," he whispered, "and I was afraid." Lan suddenly looked at him sharply. "You weren't afraid," she said bitterly. "You were selfish." Mr. Huan didn't deny it. That silence alone revealed more than words ever could. Diep slowly realized the truth. Piece by piece, the people standing in front of her were not strangers connected by coincidence. They were broken adults carrying the ruins of one destroyed family. "You let me believe my mother abandoned me," Diep whispered toward Mr. Huan. His face tightened painfully. "I thought it would be easier." "For who?" Diep asked immediately. Mr. Huan couldn't answer, because there was no answer that would not sound cruel. Across the room, Ni quietly walked toward Diep and held her hand tightly without understanding most of the conversation. The small gesture almost shattered Diep emotionally again, because suddenly she imagined losing her own daughter for 20 years. And for the first time, beneath all her anger, another emotion slowly appeared. Pain for the woman standing in front of her. Lan noticed the change immediately. Very carefully, she took one small step closer. "I know you hate me," she whispered. Diep looked at her silently through tears. "But not a single day passed where I